Good evening. Welcome to Stories in the Night, a series that takes a major look at the world of the paranormal, an area which often leaves science lost for an explanation. Throughout this series, we're hearing from people who are convinced they've experienced the most amazing events and powers. Tonight, we're looking at psychokinesis, PK as it's usually called, the ability to move things just by using the power of the mind and not physical force. Uri Geller believes in the power of PK and for years has amazed the skeptical world with his feats of metal bending. He's still to convince Professor David Marks, though, a psychologist who has been investigating the paranormal for 15 years. But someone who needs no convincing is Geoff Boltwood, a healer and clairvoyant who claims he's got PK abilities as well. Now, before we talk to Geoff, let's see what he can do. Now, earlier on today, we put him to the test to see if he could germinate seeds just by holding them. Beforehand, he was searched and we provided the seeds, and I took part in the experiment as well. Now, we can see it here. What I'm doing, these are cress seeds, which I've had on me. They were sealed. I've opened them and now put them into your hands, Geoff. Beforehand, you were searched. You've got your sleeves rolled up. Now, what is going through your mind at this moment?
Well, mainly, I'm trying to really believe that it's going to work. I really do have to know it's going to work, and I'm summoning up as much energy in my mind as I can to say this is going to work. I have no doubt.
You say you're putting it through your mind, but there's a lot of physical movement going on there with your hands. You're rubbing them together.
That's right.
And that's part of, what, channeling the energy?
It's not so much channeling the energy. I think it's almost a psychological reaction in that I find my hand become really intensely active. But it's mainly in the mind that I'm doing it.
Now, I was doing that as well. I was trying to copy you there.
Yes.
Rubbing, in fact, there we are. I'm rubbing away for all I'm worth and concentrating hard. Now, what should I have been doing at that stage?
Well, mainly what I'm hoping is that you're acting as a control anyway, because one of the criticisms has been if you rub seeds, they grow. It's not true. We've checked that with botanists. But if you rub the seeds, yours should grow as well, simply. If it's merely
healing, for example.
Well, exactly like how I like to use it.
Why didn't mine sprout then? I mean, do we all have this power?
Well, I think it must be innate in everybody. I'm sure everybody's got it. I just think you have to believe it. You really
I was concentrating like mad, you know, and I was putting everything I had into it.
Well, again, it stems with me from childhood. So I suspect that I've never had any reason not to think it will happen. It's nearly always been with me.
Did you go into that experiment convinced it would work? Did you have to have that in your mind that it's going to work?
I do have to believe it's going to work. Even though I get very nervous and worried about it, I have to believe I'm going to succeed. I don't always. I have to point out that quite often I do not succeed, and sometimes I do it 9 or 10 times and nothing happens.
Have you always had this power?
Well, I've always been aware of it, but it started mainly when I was 5 years old. I went into hospital with nephritis, both kidneys failing, and nearly died. And when I came out of hospital, immediately on coming home after 6 months away, things started to happen. Lights would go on and off in the house, the piano notes used to play, and all kinds of weird doors would open and shut.
People would say that's a poltergeist. You've got a poltergeist.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it was coming out of my mind. That's where I think
you were convinced?
Well, no, I'm sorry. In retrospect, I think. At the time, I don't think I thought about it in that way at 5 years old. In retrospect, I think it was coming out of my mind. I also started to see people that nobody else could see.
What, physical forms
and
shapes?
They were
not in your mind?
No, they were physical. They really appeared to be there.
And they speak to you?
Yes, they would speak to me. I suppose I would have been written off as perhaps going round the bend, but it turned out that one or two of them, one especially, when I told my mother, she recognised who it was. It was somebody who had been attached to that house but had died 20 years before I was born.
And did you feel a freak at that stage?
Not at that stage. I think at 5 or 6 you don't think of it in that way. It's just there. I did keep a lot of it secret, though. I didn't want to talk about it even then. But later on in life I did feel a freak, definitely.
Now, Uri, you've also germinated seeds in your time. You've listened to Geoff there, you've seen him do it. Now, do you think that was power emanating from his body doing that?
Well, what I've just seen on the table is very convincing. Again, I understand his problem of people being very skeptical, about powers from the mind, PK, because they're very, very difficult to prove. The minus with these, demonstrating these abilities, and I think David would agree, is that when you go to a laboratory, suddenly you can't produce them. It's almost like there is some kind of an inbuilt safety device around these powers that don't want to be exposed and don't want to be validated as real.
So when they're put out on the spotlight, nerves or something can block them, is that?
It's unbelievable, because when I was at Stanford Research Institute for so many months, I couldn't bend a spoon. And yet on television, it's so easy for me sometimes to do. Now,
well, we'll come on to those experiments later,
yes.
But just for the moment, you're quite happy with Geoff's explanation there of how he did it.
Yes, I feel comfortable that what I've seen here is real. But again, you know, I have not seen it from the beginning to the end. But I do believe, I tend to believe Geoff, because I say, look, if I can do some of these things, why can't other people do it?
So in theory, it's possible.
Oh, definitely.
Right. David, is it possible?
Yes, I think it's possible to produce the effect that Geoff has produced, or that Uri can produce. My problem is that I believe it's open to another interpretation. I believe that Geoff has produced a beautiful effect. As Uri has said, we didn't see it from the beginning. We've seen the final conclusion, if you like.
What would worry you? I saw it from the beginning, in the respect that we had him searched, we had someone with him all day. What would you like to know about that experiment and the way it was done?
I would have liked to have seen Geoff videoed right from the scratch, right the way through the day.
What would worry you?
Including the things he was wearing, doing, the people he was meeting, talking to, and so forth. I mean, nobody could pretend, could they, that this was a real experiment under scientific conditions.
We're not pretending that.
No,
because we
not.
couldn't really lay that on. But what would you want to ask? Well, ask Geoff. What any question you've got to try and convince you that that was real?
Well, would Geoff, for example, come to the lab and do it again, where we could actually video him constantly from the moment he entered the laboratory?
But what are you worried
about? I'm not worried at all. I'd be delighted to be one of the first people, as it were, to be present when it was done under controlled conditions. I would love to be that scientist.
But what could he have done, let's say, that you would have thought, it's a fake?
Well, I can think of ways in which it could easily be done by some kind of substitution or addition of seeds that had already sprouted from his person. There when he was searched, there are all sorts of ways of secreting things in one's body which are very hard to detect in a superficial search. For example, but there are all kinds of explanations. I can't explain what Geoff did then, because I didn't see it all.
But
I think it was a good effect.
It's an effect.
Yes.
It's an effect.
Well, I could answer. I'll answer your question. Is yes, not only would I, but I have done this. I have been in the laboratory. I have been put under controlled conditions of the kind you're asking constantly, and achieved it. It's still not convinced the sceptics. They've still said this is an effect. I don't think I can prove it. I think I can do it, but I don't think I can prove it, because I think the sceptics already know in their mind that they do not want it.
OK, David, you weren't here from the beginning for what we saw on film. You're here now. We've got a compass here. It's on the table here next to Geoff. Now, what I'd like you to do, Geoff, is to try and make that compass needle move, right, just by using your mental powers and energies. You mustn't touch the compass, kick the table or whatever.
Well, I'll keep away. I'll just say one or two things. One is, obviously, I have the search still applies and I've been guarded all day. I don't think I'm going to prove it. I still don't believe I'm going to prove it if it works. One of the suggestions that scientists have said is that I've had an implant put in my hand.
Sort of magnet?
Yeah, it's stuck in. And I don't know if the camera can see, but I don't. It would move all the time if I had an implant.
Put your hand right over it.
Right. Can you see? I don't know if you see. But what I hope to do is to I'll count 1, 2, 3 and go, and try to get energy from my hand to move it. Whether it will or not, I don't know. I'll just try now. 1, 2, 3, go! Well,
very slight. Have another go.
Shall I have another go? 1, 2, 3, go!
certainly much more movement that time. And
It's not good.
Try one more time.
Try it one more
Believe
time.
that it's going to move a lot.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, go!
Well, it moved slightly.
No, but you can't say slightly. It moved.
Yes.
Right,
It
sure,
doesn't matter
okay.
if it moved a
It's-
fraction. It moved.
Right. It
You
moved then,
understand?
David.
You
right.
can't wait for
the principle,
20 degrees.
The principle is there.
Yeah.
That I saw that move. Now, what are you going to say about that?
Well, clearly there's many sources of energy around that compass at the moment. There's all kinds of things moving around, people's feet, furniture, the objects. This water's moving now, if you like to put the camera on that, and I'm not touching it. There's lots of ways you can produce small movements in small objects.
So really nothing would convince you apart from, let's say, going to a laboratory.
Well, I know it's boring, but a laboratory it does have a purpose, as Yuri knows.
True.
He has been studied in the laboratory under rigorous controls, and he knows from his experiences how difficult it is, as he's admitted, to produce metal bending under controlled conditions.
We'll come to those experiments a little later. But for the moment, Uri, you've been accused of being the world's greatest illusionist. How do you explain your powers?
Well, unlike Geoff, I discovered it also in a different way, but also in childhood. And the reason I think that I managed to sort of sharpen these powers is because I demonstrated it constantly and constantly.
So practice makes perfect.
Yes, it's
even
like
with these.
lifting weights. If you lift for 2 or 3 days, you will not gain muscle. But if you do it for a year or two, there will be results. And that's what happened. I did telepathy, I did metal bending, and all that. And I have been accused by, for instance, this is interesting, the compass. I've been accused of having magnets in my teeth, that I swallow magnets before a performance, that I have them on my person, on a chain, and so forth. But I must say to David, although he's very skeptical, and I encountered him in the past, he was very much against me, and maybe still is, but he is right in one sense that in a laboratory, you can put such controls that you rule out cheating. And for instance, the easiest thing to do with a compass is to take a subject, and if the subject says that they can move a compass, you have to run a magnetometer on them, or there are other devices where these instruments measure any wave that can move a compass, not with PK.
So a wave that can move a compass, so does that mean your powers are waves?
I don't know what they are, but there's no doubt in my mind that our human mind, our brain, can build some kind of an energy. If you intensely think of a compass to move, or a glass of water to move, or a spoon to bend, you can actually, or let's say just a piece of paper to move under a bell jar, the intensity of your thought can generate something. I don't know if it's a wave, whether it's wavy or it's an energy, or it's, no one knows, no science knows.
What do you feel when you, let's say, try and move a piece of paper, or what is going on in your head? We heard from Geoff what's going on in his head. What's happening to you?
I constantly deeply, and then I think psychologically, I want it to move, I want it to move. And then apparently the energy becomes so focused and powerful that in many cases it does move it. But again, very hard to prove it under laboratory controlled conditions, because being skeptical negative, and it's nothing, I'm not saying it against you, because I don't know, I somehow like you. I always thought that you were a bad person, but I guess you're not. The negative people build a negative energy. There is positive energy and negative energy. And also negative energy is a power. So sometimes it almost can block a positive power. So it's very hard to work with skeptical and negative scientists.
But we all have this power. Geoff's saying we all have it. You say we all have it.
Everyone has telepathy and PK, psychokinesis, because we know so little about our brains, and you will agree to that. We almost maybe know just a fraction of what our human mind can manifest.
Even David, our skeptic here, he has potentially the power within him to move the compass.
Maybe not now,
sure.
But if he will somewhere convert, and if he will invest a year or two trying to move it, he might ponder and happen upon the fact that he did it. But then he might still not believe it.
Would you want to do that?
With due respect, Uri, I might indeed, after a year or two's training, move it in some mysterious manner. But
Yes.
would it be any use? I mean, what would be the function of me doing such a trivial thing?
Oh, you raised a very crucial question here. You know what? When Madame Curie discovered, radiation and they didn't know what to do with it immediately either.
Well,
Am I right? So that little step of you, maybe 2 years from now, being able to move a compass, maybe in our lifetimes we won't have the capacity to use it. But maybe 100 years from now, this energy that moves the compass will be harnessed, will be captured in some kind of a device, and there will be some kind of a pure energy making electricity, running cars on. Only God knows how you can utilize it. So our lifetime is maybe too short to take this incredible power and use it today, but don't rule it out.
David, Uri's been doing this for at least 2 decades now. Jeff's been doing it for a while. What do you make of it?
Well, as I said, I mean, even if it is true, which I accept it could be true, what is its function? What is its purpose for human beings, for human nature? I personally believe that there are very strong powers of mind, of a different kind perhaps than the paranormal that we're talking about today, to do with things like one's attitudes towards things. I mean, Uri's talked about having a skeptical or a negative attitude, and I believe that, yes, people do vary very much in terms of what we would crudely call in ordinary language pessimism, optimism. There's good scientific data now to suggest that pessimistic or optimistic attitudes do affect one's health, for example. Now, those are the things that interest me more than things like moving compass needles, with all due respect, because I do feel that these tend to be rather trivial things. If Geoff could, for example, go to Ethiopia today and produce marvellous, to get rid of the famine, or even to help in some small way to make plants grow, then this would be some
Geoff, is
some
that
achievement.
a possibility at some stage?
Well, I think what I would answer the triviality. I'd agree with Uri that, in fact, we don't know. One thing it does is it says that the scientific framework, as told to us by scientists, isn't what they're telling us. And I think that's important. We tend to believe that scientists have got all the answers.
Questions have to be asked.
Also, as far as I'm concerned, I have seen PK make people better from illnesses. I don't consider that trivial.
Even if he heals one person.
Do you?
Out of 1 million, that's a small miracle.
And I've certainly seen it work
We've
more
got
than one.
2 people here then, David, who are convinced there is a use for it. You're sceptical, but I'd like to know from you, Uri actually has submitted himself to scientific tests. What is your response to that? Isn't that good enough?
Well, I think some of the test conditions that Uri was in were rigorous in some ways, and they were less rigorous in others.
For instance, give us
the
an
experiments have been reinterpreted, not only by myself and my late colleague, Richard Kemen, but by other people who've been to the laboratories. And I think it's very important that we must think that, OK, I might be here today as an expert, supposedly, in this field, but I'm not an expert in all fields. And sometimes scientists step out of their area of expertise and start to believe that they can control things in a scientific way when they're really out of their depth. And I think, frankly, some of the people that Uri was working with, physicists, very, very well-trained, brilliant men, were actually a little bit out of their depth in terms of dealing with what could possibly be the most talented magician of our age.
So they
and I accept that Uri is a very, very talented, intelligent, almost supernormal person in certain ways. I'm not convinced, however, Uri, that you are paranormal abilities.
I understand you.
I do believe that you could be an extremely gifted magician. That's my personal belief.
Okay, he has his opinion, and I will not fight him, because I certainly, like Geoff, will not spend the rest of my life trying to defend my powers or my abilities. But I respect what he says. But still...
Do you take it on board? Do you think he's got a point?
No, he certainly has a point that some scientists who are very fine physicists test psychics without having, let's say, conjurers around and magicians, and they can be duped very easily. But I must say this, and maybe conclude this fine discussion, that our planet and our world is made out of dreamers, people who want to believe. And if you don't take that first step in trying to explain certain powers, then we will go nowhere.
Are you saying perhaps David will never believe because he starts from a position of unbelief?
David might never believe in this lifetime, but maybe in other lifetimes, which he might not even believe that exist, he will be a believer. No doubt
There's
in my
hope,
mind.
David, if you believe in reincarnation on this one, but that's another story in the night, I'm afraid. But have you personally witnessed Uri doing anything?
Well, I've seen Uri many years ago doing things which I have to admit at the time I thought were absolutely paranormal.
And what were they?
But then I could play back in my mind, and also some of my film that I have, and I saw another interpretation,
yes,
that Uri was in fact, perhaps for various pressures
David?
and various reasons that he might have been under at that time, where he was always being faced with the problem of a person mainly in show business to perform, to produce things.
But what
I believe,
was he spoon-bending?
I believe, Uri, that you have, on occasion, if not on many occasions, used a trick or two. And
Look,
that's
but which one did? Please tell me.
Yeah, what is spoon bending? Is it telepathy? What?
I
Don't
believe.
be embarrassed to say.
I believe that Uri can indeed produce very, very startling effects, and I'm convinced that they would convince a lot of scientists. But personally, I believe there is a trick, there is a way of doing it.
All right. The answer to that is very simple. You can. I mean, that's my way of saying it and describing. First of all, a magician could, yes, duplicate most of the things that I and Geoff and other psychics do with trickery. But so what? Because they can duplicate it with trickery and they convince him that I was using tricks, that doesn't mean that I'm doing it that way, Geoff. It's like you take two paintings. One is an original Picasso and the other one looks exactly the same, but it's a fake. And people go into the exhibition and they don't know which one is real and they're confused, but one is genuine, so they can look the same, but there is only one genuine Picasso and the other is a fake.
You mean, it obviously doesn't worry you that people like David don't believe. Does it worry you, Geoff?
No, not in the slightest. I feel like Uri that it will only really get across to the people who are ready to see it, and the dreamers that Uri is talking about. I don't believe we'll convince people like David, and I no longer really think I want to that much.
Neither do I.
David, do you think, does it worry you that these people aren't concerned?
Yes, it worries me that they would no longer want to convince me, because I would love to be convinced. I am an open-minded skeptic in that sense. I disbelieve some things more strongly than others, but yes, I'd love to believe that Geoff could do what he is now claiming.
But do you think, though, is there scientific proof that mental energy can move atoms? I believe there is. Not necessarily pieces of paper, but atoms.
Well, this is an area of controversy, yes. There's some quite interesting findings when meta-analysis is done, where you look at all the findings in the field, you do find there is a small effect where perhaps it's greater than chance to move particles in one direction rather than another. There is a huge literature on this. It's almost impossible for one person to read it all. But yes, there is some evidence, some exciting evidence done in laboratories of this kind. But they're small effects, and one wonders, what's going on. So I believe in a natural world where everything that happens is happening for a reason, for a cause. I know that's boring, but I think eventually the things that everybody is talking about will have an explanation.
So the principle is there. But gentlemen, we must leave the debate there, I'm afraid, for tonight. Well, I hope tonight's discussion has given you a clear idea about PK and what it might be. Unfortunately, we can't deal with individual cases, but if you think you've got a problem, we suggest you seek professional advice from someone like your doctor or your local church. From Stories in the Night, good night.